Working Cows Podcast, episode 391. This episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios, and this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship. Until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. Very excited to be joined by John Moody. John is a guy that I am familiar with from many different sectors, his work in agriculture, but also some of his work in the theology sector. And so really appreciate his perspective in a lot of these things and kind of the depth of understanding that he brings to it. And a listener of the podcast reached out and said, hey, he was just on the Wise Traditions podcast with Weston A. Price, and would love for you to the Weston A. Price Foundation. I know he was a dentist, passed away many years ago. But anyways, I'd love for you to get him on and get his perspective shared with the Working Cows audience. And I was like, wow, my worlds are colliding here. So very, very excited to talk to John about what he's got going on and what he's doing to fight the mandatory RFID, and what he's doing to fight the incoming mandatory RFID regulations. So, John, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Hey, I am excited to be here because I really like cows.
Yeah, cows are great in a lot of different ways. And what we're going to talk today about is the RFID issue. And, we're going to talk to mostly cattle people today. And so what are we dealing with? What are we facing? Where are we at in this process as it relates to RFID becoming mandatory for cattle producers?
Yeah. So I assume your listeners are people who have been doing cattle for decades. So they're already familiar that this is the sixth or seventh rodeo we've had with RFID. RFID, I think, was originally dreamed up in the late 80s, early 90s. They tried to push versions of it. The biggest push was the 2008-2009 National Animal Identification System. That was the crazy version where you had to tag down to individual chickens. And the USDA, being the USDA, they're already spending money somewhere else to find out why the chicken crossed the road. But that program, you had 24 hours to report when and where the chicken crossed the road, or you faced absurd fines. I can't remember if it was like $500 or $5,000 an offense for not calling a 1-800 hotline anytime one of your animals, broke the boundary of its permitted, residence or whatever. And so we successfully stopped RFID, as all sorts of groups in 2009 banded together to give USDA hell, make sure that did not get implemented. I think Hageman defeated it in Congress once or twice into 2010s, and it was also stopped by lawsuits a couple times in the 2010s into the early 2020s. And it is back again this November 5th is the official rollout. I don't know exactly where the current rule stands. One of the games we play in fighting the government is they'll announce like the original rule, and it'll be something really, something more palatable than then when they actually roll it out, it actually is. So at first they said, oh, this was just going to apply to steers that were entering interstate commerce. But now what I'm hearing from people is in a bunch of different states, butchers are saying that they've been told by their inspectors that it will be required, period, to be able to use them as a butcher. I've heard things that the rule has been revised to include also all cows are now included in the RFID rule. And, the thing I tell everybody about this, it doesn't matter because we know what they want long term. If they can't get national animal identification in one fell swoop like they tried in 2009, they will get us through death by 1,000 cuts of animal identification. Steers here, cows there, lamb, until in 4 or 5 years we'll basically have the same thing.
Are they starting with cows only, or with bovine critters only at this point? I mean,
my understanding is it is just steers for interstate commerce, and maybe also any cows entering interstate commerce,
but not chickens, not pork. I mean, that stuff's basically already controlled, right? That's a controlled supply chain anyways. It's all, confinement, chickens and pork. So I think livestock cows get focused on in this way more acutely because they are one of the last free sources of protein in the United States. Would you agree with that?
Well, to some extent, the reason they're going after cows first, yes. But, in all of these animal ID programs, there is an exemption for confinement animal farming operations. They do not have to individually tag their animals. But what makes this even more interesting is if you look at meat eating data in the US over the last 20 years, so, pigs and chickens are the pigs and chickens that predominate in grocery stores are CAFO raised, but the growing alternative market for poultry and pork has exploded. It's really the first, so ever since the Wholesome Meat Act and Earl Butts in the 1950s, 1960s, USDA congressional actions that are what led to massive consolidation in farming and in the whole farm food chain supply, in butchering and abattoirs, the whole 9 yards. There's been this one direction to the U.S. meat supply across to all the major protein sources up until the early 2000s. And then you have Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. You have a bunch of these food documentaries come out. And, at first, it just kind of stemmed that tide of consolidation. We kind of hit this point, and, but now, really across the three big meats of pork, chicken, and cows, there really seems to be that we are starting to gain ground. But a lot of this ground isn't being gained by large scale farms and ranches. It's the fact that, within 30 miles of my house now, there are 200 people who raise 100 to 200 meat birds. And they're selling those just to neighbors and family members and friends from church. And this has become a real credible threat to the industrial consolidated food system, which is one reason the RFID goes down to basically insanely low numbers. It's like if you have more, I think one of the rules was if you had more than 25 chickens, you had to RFID tag every single one. So I tell people, like, if you're a homesteader, these rules will ensnare you because you are the actual threat to the consolidated meat system. Because what they're terrified of you understand this, you probably explored this on your podcast, how few farmers we have left in America.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the late 1940s, 50% of American households were still farming households. And is it like 2.3% now?
Yeah.
But there's been this huge resurgence the past 2 decades of homesteaders. And homesteaders can very easily become, so the 10 million people who identify as homesteaders now, if just a fraction of those moved into vocational farming, all of a sudden you're adding millions of farmers to this equation again. But these are all people who are direct marketing, not part of the consolidated system. So a lot of RFID, it's definitely focused at kowtowing, for lack of a better word, the beef industry, which is one of the few areas where you have a lot of independent spirit and stuff still. You see that with RCAP, you see that with Farm Action, all of these different beef groups. But it's also aimed at, they're noticing that the trend of consolidation has started to maybe even softly reverse, that they're losing market share to people like me who just raised 6 pigs. But when there's 2 million people like me raising 6 to 10 pigs, it begins to show up in the numbers. And they're like, well, what do we do about these people? We can't compete with them on quality. We can't compete with them on transparency. And they're starting to be able to compete with us on price because they're getting smarter. We'll just regulate them out of competition.
I think I've always had I've got this latent free market affection, right? Affection for the free market. And so then there's this conflict of, do we want a regulation? Do we want to introduce this regulation? And I think that sometimes the answer to that is, well, in order to defend myself against a company who can afford to buy special favors from a monopoly power in the form of government, yes, I do want to introduce a regulation, but I don't think that's necessarily your approach in this regard, right? I think that you're taking a different approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm fine. I wouldn't call it regulation. I'm good with regulation that regulates government. That's what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were supposed to be. The Bill of Rights have been weaponized against us. The Bill of Rights was meant to regulate the government, and the founding fathers somehow missed this is the reality. Sorry for my noisy chickens in the background laying eggs. But they turned what was supposed to regulate them into something that regulates us. So I'm all for, we need legislation to kill off the beef checkoff program. But I'm not hopeful that's how we're going to get there. And so me and some friends for the past decade have kind of chosen a different path to try and make progress on behalf of ourselves, and especially on behalf of the farmers who feed us. Because, vocationally, just for your listeners, I'm not a farmer. We homestead. I have 30 acres. We've raised cows, chickens, pigs, meat birds, turkeys, ducks, rabbits, but I'm not raising, a vocational living from these animals. This supplements other things I do. And I realized years ago, it's hard for farmers, especially because, farming has been so financially hollowed out. It's so hard to profitably make a living farming. It's that much harder for farmers right now to do something about the ways they're being mistreated and basically driven into the hand of these corporations who just want to extract maximal profit until there's none of you left. So me and my friends started to do things about that in terms of acts of, public protest and civil disobedience, violating the USDA's regulations right on the footsteps of the USDA in Silver Springs, Maryland, and challenge them to come and arrest us. And then also through Rogue Food, which is a conference Joel Salatin and I put on, teaching creative circumvention and non-compliance as really just like the surest route to finally stop some of this stupidity before there's no one left to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have some examples in your past of winning fights like this, and you've kind of alluded to some of that. Can you give me some specific examples of things that you've been involved in the past that have resulted in victories?
Yeah, well, so I started in 2006 a local food buying club in Louisville, Kentucky. I was really sick during my master's work in the early 2000s, almost died because of the health issues I was having. And I was able to heal myself with food from real, actual farmers. And the thing that, though, began to drive me crazy was how hard it was for me to get just food straight from a farmer. So like we went from shopping at Walmart and Sam's Club and Kroger to on Tuesday night, I got to go to the Bardstown Farmers Market because that's where the pastured pig farmer is. And then on Wednesday, I have to go to a dark alley in a different part of Louisville to meet my milk farmer because I got to get my moo shine. And then on Friday, I still got to go to Kroger because I still got to get some things from Kroger and stuff. And then on Saturday, I got to go to another farmer's market because that's where the unsprayed apples and berries are. And then on Monday, I have to go to a CSA pickup to get and I'm like, I have reinvented hunting and gathering. All of my time is spent trying to get basic food straight from farmers. I'm like, this is utterly, just like, this isn't sustainable. I got 6 kids. I don't, at the time I only had went from no kids to 2 kids real quickly. And I was just like, man, this is not like a workable system. And I have a business finance economics undergraduate in math. And I began to look at research on farming. And I'm like, when I shop at most of these places, the farmers get less than 20 cents on the dollar of what I spent. I'm looking at chicken breast at Whole Foods back in 2005 or 6. And the chicken breast is $12 a pound. And I'm like, the farmer got $1.17. Where did the other $11 go? And so I started a food buying club in 2006, which was us and 18 other families who wanted what we called food with a face. We really, I wanted to be invested in the families who had invested themselves in feeding my family. Buying club grew like gangbusters. I think by 2010, we were doing $500,000 a year. And this is back when $500,000 was actually something to like $500,000. I can't even buy a matchstick house anymore. But this is back when $500,000 actually meant a little bit of something. And in 2011, we were raided by the Kentucky State Health Department. For your listeners, if you're not familiar, from the late 1990s to the mid 2010s, federal government leaned heavily on state health departments, state ag departments, state attorney generals to try and wipe out interest in raw milk and alternative local food distribution. So like you can go look at the videos of the Rossum Food Cooperative in California being raided at gunpoint, a bunch of California hippies, like their kale's going to shoot back or something at the police officers. Manna Storehouse in Ohio, Athens Locally Grown, Mark Baker in Michigan, Alvin Schlangen, Vernon Hirschberger, just hundreds of stories across that decade. And we know, and people are always like, well, how do you know, John, it was the federal government doing this? my friend Max Kane and others did all of these sunshine requests on themselves because a lot of them were being drug into court, threatened with things. And Max kept coming across things like phone call between the Wisconsin DAC tap and the USDA and FDA. And the title of the phone call was The Max Kane Problem. Because the FDA and USDA were the ones calling the shots. They were the ones like, hey, you need to do something about all these people letting people directly support farmers. So I was rated, my buying club was rated 2011, and we were one of the first groups in the nation to be rated and walk away clear winners. Up until that point, almost everybody who had been rated or drug into court had taken it pretty badly on the chin. And I was really fortunate that about 90% of the members of my buying club broke the cease and desist and quarantine orders with me. I'm a skinny white dude. I'm not going to jail with some guy named Jimbo who just ripped all the copper out of some corner church the other night. If I'm going to jail, I'm taking friends I like. And so that was my first real introduction to choosing to go toe to toe with a state level agency who was fully committed to putting me in jail and parting me from a lot of my possessions if they could, solely because I had the audacity to think I get to choose what I eat and what I feed my kids.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. And the key to that victory was the group that joined you. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's a big part of it. This is what convinces me. If farmers in America really and truly were sick of the beef checkoff program, we could kill beef checkoff in a year. We absolutely could kill the beef checkoff program because the only way they can enforce these things is because we complain about them, but we continue to comply. And so people are like, well, where else did this non-compliance work? So we had a group of guys in 2012 and girls who did a Lemonade Freedom Protest Day on the Capitol Mall in Washington, D.C. A bunch of Ron Paul, anarcho-capitalist kids, basically, who you remember back in the 2010s when they were literally fining parents because their kids had lemonade stands. And that just level of nonsense. And so these Ron Paul people were like, we're going to do a Lemonade Freedom Day protest, a truly peaceful protest on the Capitol Mall.
Yeah.
And they show up to do this.
No corner grocery stores were burned in the making of this protest.
Exactly. And so they showed up to do their little protest event and started distributing and selling lemonade on the Capitol Mall. And I think the videos are still on YouTube. They got roughed up and a bunch of them got thrown in jail overnight for doing a truly they should have burned down a few things. They probably wouldn't have gone to jail at all. And so they reached out to a bunch of us who had been helping Mark Baker, Vernon Hershberger, other farmers. And we're like, man, this was such a great idea. This protest is such a good idea. The problem is you just did not go big enough. It was like you and 15 friends. I go and so Max Kane and Liz Reitzig and Michael Schmidt, all of these people I became friends with. They're just like, we need to do this again, but we need to just make it bigger and better and more ridiculous. So for a whole year, we're planning a raw milk and lemonade freedom day on the Capitol Mall. And probably starting about 6 months out, my friend Max started calling the USDA and FDA and letting him know we were coming. He used to have these up on YouTube. They're the best videos ever because Max would call, like the FDA. And be like, hey, this is Max Kane. It's good to hear your voice again, Margaret. Because he knows like all the people's names because he's calling every single week. He's like, is John Sheehan or Michael Taylor finally in today? I've been trying to reach them for months, and it's like these guys never go into work. And so we show up on our day for the raw milk and lemonade freedom day protest. And we're fully assuming that it's likely we're going to go to jail like last time. But we had, easily 400 some people show up for this protest event. And as we begin to gather on the Capitol Mall, all of the police cars roll up their windows and drive away. Mm. And the next day, the FDA released a statement basically rolling back some of their raw milk policies. Mm. And we were just like, this is the way to do this. Why are we always, I do martial arts as like my way to relieve stress. I get into a padded room with other large males and we spend all night, folding laundry while the other person is still inside it. And one thing you learn in martial arts is if you get your opponent on their heels, they're not likely to recover. Once you got them on the run, once they're back and have lost their balance and their sense of place, as long as you don't do something boneheaded, you are almost certainly going to win. And we were just like, man, we've spent, a decade, all of our farmers and stuff being on their heels. And we finally got the USDA and the FDA on the run a little bit. And so we then did like a Silver Springs event where we did raw milk and cookies on the footstep of the Silver Springs, Maryland FDA headquarters. It was fabulous. And again, the FDA rolled back more policies because of that. And that's really why that was our last really major public act of civil disobedience and noncompliance. Because after that one, the FDA basically almost completely dropped their war on raw milk because a few hundred people did a couple targeted protest events. And so I've been convinced for a decade, the only reason America's independent farmers are in such bad shape is because they choose to be. Now there's not 10 million of you, there's not 20 million of you, but if we lock hands with the homesteading community, where Joel Salatin and I have huge connections, huge followings, and you lock hands with the remaining good farmers, you can kill beef checkoff. You can kill pork checkoff. You could make so much headway so quickly if we'd stop the bickering over a lot of stupid things, focus on the shared issues that are what are wiping all of us out, and committed. Just again, what are they going to do if 2 million farmers say, I am no longer paying for a program that funds an industry that is out to destroy me and my neighbors?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Appreciate that. And how do we translate that then to the RFID? What are some of the things that you are working on right now? Because we're staring down the barrel of this being implemented. I'm going to put this out just a couple of weeks before the deadline for the implementation of it. What are some of the things that you guys are working on right now to kind of put those kind of same ideas into practice?
Yeah, well, one is we are fomenting massive noncompliance. Congressman Thomas Massey, he's a friend of mine in real life. A number of months ago, he put on his Facebook when he heard about the rule coming out this fall. He put up a big bull with a banner over it that said, "Come and take it." And for once in my life, I realized I will be more clever than Thomas Massey. And I took that image and edited it, and I have it say, "Come and tag it." And so we are encouraging.
And it's in the vein of the canon, right, from the
Yeah.
Revolutionary War. Come and take it. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Love
and,
it.
and so we want people to fully commit themselves. We have butchering associations who have signed on that they will not enforce RFID, and they will encourage all of the butchers in these associations to not comply if the USDA tries to require RFID for people to be able to get their animals butchered. We have homesteaders on board with this who are just like, nope, no matter what, we will not comply. And we know lots and lots of farmers, and every day we're trying to get more farmers on board, just saying and letting the USDA know, I will not do it. I am not geo radio frequency ID tagging my cows, so you can know exactly how many cows there are in America and exactly where they are at all times, and then try and pull an Ireland on us or some other nonsense. And so that's the first step, is just me and others are working really, really hard to convince farmers that simple non-compliance is enough to stop this program. We don't have to waste $50 million on a lawsuit. We just don't. We just need to walk away and say, nope, not doing it, and get our neighbors to do the same.
Yep. And I think in my context, most of these cattle in the next few weeks are going to leave the ranch and go through a sale barn, through an auction market. And in my experience, most of those auction barns are very involved in RCAF or very sympathetic to RCAF or the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, which is different from the NCBA. And so they're opposing those things. And I think that they will be, I think they will be a co-belligerent in this, not saying, oh, we won't sell your cattle if they're not RFID tagged. Now, I don't know if it's going to affect the price that you get, because then the feedlot has to do it. But there again, the feedlots need to be willing to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this too. I mean, ultimately, I know we have
well, the feedlots are exempted.
Right. Okay. Right.
That's the thing. They don't care because they get it's called a premises ID.
Sure.
They don't have to individually tag, because once an animal's on a feedlot or in a CAFO barn, the assumption is it's never going anywhere else.
Sure.
So tracking is no longer necessary. So get everybody you can on board. The pastor of our church is on his way down to North Carolina today, because that's where his family's from, just outside the Asheville area. And I'm looking forward to hearing some firsthand reports about the FEMA nonsense.
Right.
But what's going on from friends I have heard from is simple non-compliance is turning the tide quite quickly. People just saying no, local sheriffs saying, why aren't farmers getting their local sheriffs involved with stuff like this? In the state of Indiana, a sheriff by the name, I believe, of Brad Daniels. You can read about this if you Google it. Brad Daniels was a sheriff in Indiana. A farmer in his county was being harassed by the USDA, I believe. And the farmer just called his sheriff. And he said, this is what the USDA is trying to make me do, and it's a violation of my constitutional rights. So the sheriff, who is a member of the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association, he sent the USDA and FDA letters, I guess. But that was the end of it.
Yeah.
He just said, if you continue to harass this farmer, I will take legal action against you. And if you show up in my county, I will arrest you on site if you are harassing people under my protection. There's just, what if you got the sheriff in the counties of these sale barns to be present at sales. And if the FDA and USDA and APHIS showed up to harass people, the sheriff said, no, I will arrest you if you infringe upon these good families' constitutional right to make a living, and put the fear of God back into these agencies.
Yeah.
Again, this is one of the fundamental problems we're sitting. I think it was Jefferson, but it might have been Franklin who said, when the government fears the people, there is liberty. And when the people fear the government, there is tyranny.
Yeah.
And I understand people are afraid.
Yep. Yep. I'm a pastor of a local church. That's the 9 to 5, right? But so what we hear oftentimes from the church and from pastors, unfortunately, is but Romans 13, but here's the deal: tyranny from government is disobedience to God. And then, so if I'm going to obey a tyrant, I have to disobey God too, right? Am I missing something there?
Well, that's Knox. John Knox is the one who popularized the saying,
right.
And Schaeffer said the same, Francis Schaeffer said the same thing. The way I put it to people to really help people is, how do you love somebody doing evil things? If a dude walks into your house and he's like, I'm here to kill your family, is it loving for you to hand the guy a machete or a shotgun? No, the most loving thing you do, especially as a Christian, to people who are doing evil things is stop them.
Yeah.
Like this is just very, very basic Bible. If our basic command is to love our neighbor, and I see my neighbor about to beat his wife or set his house on fire, I don't hand him matches and lighter fluid. I subdue the person. And so that's one aspect of it, just in terms of for Christians in your audience. The second one is, no government can prohibit or make it prohibitively difficult for me to fulfill things God has commanded. God has commanded me to provide for my family. God has afforded me measures of privacy and security, in doing that, as has the Constitution. And no government gets to violate its own laws. We are where we are as a farm base because when there were 25 million farmers in the 60s, and Earl Butz came along with this get big and get big or get out program, the farmers just didn't get Earl out of the building. They're like, why didn't they I love my neighbors, but years and years ago, we moved out into a rural area, 2010, bought a homestead, started raising animals and things. I've been doing this about 15 years. And just down the road from me, I became friends with a really old farmer, super sweet guy. His family's been here 5, 6, 7 generations, whatever. And he invited me one day to go with him to the cattle barn sale. Because here in Irvington, Kentucky, just up the road, we have one of the cattle sale barns for the region. And I go up there to the sale barn, never been to a sale barn before in my life. And I sit through the auction. And I'm like, how many sellers are here? And my neighbor's like, oh, on any given day, there's, up to 500 farms selling cattle. I go, how many buyers are here? He goes, 1, maybe 2. And I'm just sitting here going, dude, up the road in Louisville where my buying club is, that every single one of you could be direct selling cattle if you wanted. Because we're sitting there during the sale barn, and every time a lot of cows sell, I see one of my neighbors' countenance fall. Because they're getting, saw lots of cattle. This was obviously 2012 or something. You see a lot of cattle go for 89 cents a pound, $1.15 a pound, $1.30 a pound live weight on beautiful cattle. And I just look at my neighbor and I'm just like, why do you all come to sell here? Why? Why? why do you play a rigged game that you know is killing you and your family? And it's why your kids don't want to inherit your farm or land. Like nobody's making you take these cows to the sale barn.
Yeah. Nope. Absolutely. We gotta be willing to look at things differently, look at the opportunities differently, and do things differently if we're gonna expect different results, right? Talk to me a little bit about the 1-day conference in Texas, or maybe it's 2-day conference in Texas you've got coming up.
Yeah. So Joel and I years ago started in a conference called Rogue Food. And Joel and I came across tons of really interesting people over the past couple decades who had found creative ways to escape regulation. People doing food churches and buying clubs and private member associations and educational butchering operations. There's like this lady in Oregon or somewhere, and she wanted to butcher animals. For some odd reason, she didn't have $3.5 million laying around to build a USDA inspected facility. And, she ended up talking to like some of the local officials and stuff. And she's like, what if I do educational butchering? Do I need these licenses? And they're like, well, no, like if you're doing education, people are paying you for education. And she's like, and what if they take home meat from butchering? They're like, well, that's fine because they're paying for education. You're not butchering animals. And so just like so many neat ways to crack nuts. And so we started a conference that totally focused on that. Our 9th conference is this November 8th and 9th down in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. And its special theme is Come and Tag It. So Congresswoman Harriet Hageman is coming. She's going to be one of the speakers. We have a number of other really cool speakers. Holly Hickman from School of Traditional Skills, which is a really cool, more, again, homesteading, focusing on this just huge swell of people who really want to see farmers like you all thrive and are willing to fight alongside of you to help make that happen. Sean and Amy Kelly of Crunchy Mama Farms, who built their own butchering operation that's a totally educationally based farm, so that they can do these things and supply food to people without all of the crazy red tape. So it's going to be fun. The main event is Saturday, November 9th. That's when Hageman's going to be there. And then since my background is business and finance, economics, and I've now been working in food and farming for 20 years, on Friday, I'm doing a shorter seminar to really help people understand how to build profitable farm and homestead businesses. Because you really, really can. It's just like there's so many neat ways, like take farmers who they're like, well, John, I don't want to have to direct sell and manage the inventory of all the different cuts of beef for my cows and free. I'm like, dude, I met a farmer in Indiana years ago who raised pigs for fun, only would raise like 15, 20 pigs a year. The only thing he did to those pigs, he would turn the entire pig into breakfast sausage.
Mm-hmm.
It was a homemade recipe, one of the best breakfast sausages I've ever tasted in my entire life. He sold out every year. No inventory, and he only sold it 20 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds at a time. You want his sausage? Here you go. He had minimal inventory management. You don't have to compete with the commodity system. You don't have to compete with the grocery store. I know other farmers who are making a better than full-time living, doing nothing but 15 or 20 events a year where they do a whole cow cook for somebody's fancy wedding. They do a whole pig cook for somebody's graduation party. So that seminar is really all about helping farmers and homesteaders realize there's money out there and you should go where the money is if you want to be happy and successful. And there's people who will pay phenomenal money for quality, convenience, and experience. And people are going to pay you pennies on the dollars for commodities. So do you want to exist in the commodity world where you're going to get pennies on the dollar, or do you want to exist in these other places where people will pay you top dollar and still say thank you at the end of the day?
Yeah, where I'm not in a place with a population base big enough. Even the major hub city in our region isn't big enough to have a whole paycheck Whole Foods market. There's two independent local health food grocery stores, right? It's where you can get your paper plates that don't have any dye or plastic in them or all that stuff, right? And I was checking out there one day, and this gal was checking out ahead of me, $32 for a whole chicken. So I mean, there's people willing to do it, willing to buy it, and the demand is there everywhere.
Yeah, there's people, and again, it's obviously more challenging for farmers who are in the West, where you have low population density and a lot of farmers. But why not band together to direct market?
Yep.
Direct market. You don't need butcher box. Maybe you literally need 100 farms that want to build a few meat boxes together and sort those logistics and stuff, so that you take back some of that value that's being extracted from you. So there, and a lot of there's a lot of tourism out west now. I've never understood why more farmers out west aren't taking advantage of the tourism angle. A friend of mine who's a farmer in Ohio, he's not far off 71 North outside of Columbus, and has a beautiful dairy farm, really nice area. He put in some camping sites on, I think it's called like Hip Camp or something. And then he put in a few tiny houses that he uses as Airbnbs. And he basically makes off of those things like half of a full-time income, just off of people traveling through anyway. And then while they're there, they buy food from him too. There's so much opportunity. And I really want farmers to take advantage of it and get themselves out of being chained to the commodity system that doesn't appreciate them at all. Because if your individual farm goes under, JBS don't care. None of these big meat companies care one nickel.
I think the RFID thing is the step towards JBS owning the farm anyways. I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, there's widespread agreement on this, that, the goal is just like with chickens, complete vertical integration, down to the cows, everything.
Yep.
And again, that's why like RFID to me it's a must-win issue. But if we win on RFID, we don't have to stop there, folks.
Yeah.
We could do something about beef checkoff. It would not be that hard to really make progress against a bunch of these programs that only exist to serve the needs and goals of these multinational beef conglomerates, rather than our farm base, our communities, our home states, and our families. And that's what gets me excited is, by the end of this decade, by the early 2030s, we could reverse the trend of losing farms.
Yep.
If people will finally put their foot down and be willing to do something about it.
And I think that I think a lot of the problem in American agriculture right now is monocultures. And we do have diverse pastures here, but they're a monoculture of livestock, right? And if we would diversify our livestock operations, and you don't even have to do the diversification, just open up the acreage for the kid who wants to come out and move chicken tractors every day, to come and do that. And it's going to make your land better, having him do that. And it's going to open up another income stream for him to, support his family, sell good, high quality, nutrient dense meat to people who want it, and so I think it's just just thinking differently about all these things is going to, and we can do what you're talking about. We can do it. It's totally possible. We just have to stop, continuing to let ag business drive the direction of agriculture in America.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is because I think you all have more rolling, flattish land. It's like, take the issue of chickens. I think there's a farm called Pasture Bird in California. They created these 2,000 bird chicken tractor type setups. Though you can't do that in Kentucky, almost anywhere. You can't do that in most of the country, but your part of the country has unique opportunities. Again, if 10 farms, work together, and then you're selling those chickens into the Chicagoland or other areas where there's all of that demand. And right now it's being met by Butcher Box or other people. Obviously it's going to take some work. It's going to take maybe finding a way to get investment. But there's just like so much opportunity, especially because of all the nonsense of the last few years and instability in the country. I really just want farmers to realize you don't just have to sit and take it anymore.
Yep. Okay, so I'm selfishly going to wrap this up because I got some bonus content questions I want to ask you, but just one last call to action. Where are we sending people? Like I said, we're going to get this out before the Texas event. So where are we sending people? What do you want in the show notes page?
Yeah, the website for the conference is roguefoodconference.com. And I'll set up a discount code of COWS10 that'll get people $10 off tickets to the event.
Cool.
So anybody who's Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, we'd love to have you come down. Hageman will love to see farmers from other regions of the country who really care about this issue. And we're going to have great food straight off a farm that's never seen an inspector. So food is always included with this event when we put it on, and the food matches our values. When we put on an event, it's a pastured steer from a farm. We can tell you exactly where that fella came from.
Yeah, we can tell you where he took his last bite of grass. And Harriet Hageman's traveling all the way from Wyoming, so other people from farther away than where John listed, you're welcome to come too. So, well, John, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, brother. So thank you so much.
Very good stuff there with John. Really appreciate his perspective and just the way that he talks about these things. As I said, he's a guy that I knew of his work in the theology sector or in the way he was influencing people from that perspective before I knew of his thoughts on food and farming and some of those things. So we kind of appreciate him coming on and sharing that. Again, the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/391. If you want to jump in on this opportunity with the conference in Texas, you can find links there in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/391. Coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast, Lord willing, we will be talking with Grant Vaspers, and we're going to talk to him about what he has seen and found to be true as far as cattle that are low maintenance, breed back every year, and continue to exhibit longevity. And we're going to talk to him about a service that he is starting to help people find those kind of bulls in their area. So look forward to sharing that with you coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.